Hello and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we talk about stories told across a range of different mediums, books, short stories, movies, comics, you name it. As always, we have only one rule. We can only talk about things in terms of the writing. Things like effects, art, music, animation, and so on and so forth are out unless they relate directly to how the story is told. I am Daniel Radford, author, Existential Threat to the Multiverse, and also your host. And today I'm joined once more by John Kernan as we go into episode 3 of our cycle on genre blending. This time we'll be
I'm
taking
also a threat to the multiverse.
the delay on that was just great. uh, this time we'll be taking a look at, honestly, probably the most recent story so far that wasn't written by me. Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is a movie written and directed by Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert. I don't know what to tell you, it's just a writer name, I guess.
Many of you may find this hard to believe based on what the title is, but the title's exactly what the movie is about.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, yeah. Like, where to even begin? But there is a
Oh,
reason this came up as an option very early on when we were talking about doing genre blending as a cycle because it really is everything everywhere all at once. I'll list it
yeah.
out a little
It,
bit for
oh,
you. The movie is a comedy, a drama, a sci fi movie, a martial arts action movie, a romance, a tale of familial love, an exploration of loneliness, depression, generational trauma, a story of self discovery, and all the while being all of those things, it is also a metaphor and an examination of existentialism and the two different varieties of nihilism in pessimistic and optimistic nihilism.
I would say even more than just the two different varieties. I would say the entire spectrum of nihilism, but it does emphasize both extremes.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, to be honest. So,
One
yeah,
thing that there's a lot of different things to interpret about this movie, a lot of different ways. But one thing nobody can deny because it's some of the things the movie says outright is it presents us nihilism and the idea that nothing matters. And the way that some people interpret that as if nothing matters, why should I care? And others interpret that as, well, if nothing matters, then everything matters. Whatever I want to matter matters.
yeah, precisely. That's why I definitely focus in on the pessimistic and optimistic schools of nihilism because that is effectively those philosophies in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Nothing matters. Nothing has any inherent meaning, being nihilism in general, and then pessimistic nihilism being therefore why should I care? With optimistic nihilism being because nothing has any inherent meaning, I can choose what I take meaning, like what I find meaning in,
Hell yeah,
which
you can do
is
whatever you want. You can put googly eyes on a rock.
damn right.
I was so happy too because when I got to the moment early on, it's just like no more Google eyes. I went, no, I loved seeing Google eyes on that bag. Google eyes on everything. So when I got to the moment of later, I was like, ah, yeah,
Google Eyes just
justification.
they make everything cuter.
They really do. I love them.
Yeah, it's funny. I generally do a fair amount of preparation for these episodes. You know, even though everything after the first couple of paragraphs is completely unscripted. You know, I'll write the notes and the talking points down. I'll plot things out in my head, like for a general flow of how things are gonna go. I usually have some idea of where to begin and what to discuss. For this one, I genuinely have no freaking clue. Like, do we want to continue diving into the philosophy? Do we want to talk about what genres it blends, etc., etc.? I think maybe we should begin by just doing a summary of what the movie is.
Yeah, I I don't think that's a bad idea at all because the genre blending is a very natural part of it. The philosophy end of it is just sitting over here being Thanos in the corner. It's inevitable. We'll get to it. Like this movie starts out being good right away, but also very innocuous. First thing we're presented with is just a mildly dysfunctional first generation Chinese family in America that owns a laundromat. They're uh they're torn between the fact that the mother's very old school traditionalist and kind of cranky father, who is my dearly beloved man, one of my favorite actors of all time, is here to visit us. And she's freaking out because at the same time as he's supposed to be visiting, their laundromat is getting audited, and she's trying to figure out how not to scare her father away and also deal with a potential outburst from revealing to him that her daughter, who she's been having a lot of trouble with lately, is gay. Both because she herself is a little not okay with it, but she's honestly not that bad. Most of her
She's trying.
bad reaction, most of her bad reaction to it is worrying, is just a mixture of not understanding it and not being bothered by it, but also not having the patience or energy to try harder to understand it because she's too worried about all her other shit and she's not taking the proper time to deal with it.
Yeah.
And really just being afraid of how her dad is going to react because she doesn't want him to have like a heart attack or a really bad outburst that would just make her daughter feel even worse.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think the big part of it, like, she's obviously grown up in a very conservative, traditional household herself and is still adjusting.
And also, you could just say a Chinese house. I don't think China's very gay friendly.
I mean, a lot of places aren't for some reason.
True.
But, so there's that. But I think definitely the meat of the problem is that she's worried about how it will look to her father because she feels like she's never really been able to live up to his expectations. And he's never really given her the impression that she has. That's where the generational trauma aspect comes into it. It's passing down those high expectations that nobody can really meet, just generation to generation to generation. And she's not just like that with her daughter, she's like that with her husband too. He is a very loving, soft hearted man, but he's not really got any huge ambitions or anything, and that's how his life, and it shows in how he lives. And she's, she loves him dearly, but she's kind of ashamed too because her dad wanted so much more.
Yeah, it can take a minute in the movie to actually learn their names, but for the sake of clarity now, as we move forward, we'll just let you all know. Those of you who don't already know, in which case, I guess before we go too far, I should actually really just stop and say, we don't normally do this, but anybody who is watching this and has not seen this movie yet, please watch everything everywhere all at once. That's one thing I want to say before we get into everything else. This movie is, I think, really, really good and should be experienced because there's not that much we can say about it without spoiling it. I think we've already covered almost everything that's not pretty intense spoilers already.
Also, it is just a good movie.
It's a very good movie. This
It's
movie made me feel things.
it's one of those times where a movie wins a bunch of awards and then you go watch it and you're like, oh, yeah, actually, fair enough.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, the mom's name is Evelyn and dad's name is Wayman, and their daughter is Joy, which is a shockingly, I mean, not like I've never heard of Asian girls named Joy before, but like, dang, their family, both of them came from fairly traditional families and immigrated from China and still primarily speak Chinese when they're around each other. I really would have thought she'd have a more Asian name, to be honest.
I mean, it's entirely possible that she did what a lot of people do when they immigrate across from China and adopted a more westernized name.
Yeah, it's the only thing I can think of. Or, maybe it was Wayman's idea. Maybe Wayman just wanted her name to be something really warm and happy. That sounds like him.
That does sound like him. But
Ah,
yeah, so
precious man.
that's your three main characters. There's also some fairly significant side characters in. Like they call him Gong Gong. I don't know his actual name, but that is Evelyn's father.
Like the butt plug award. That's a really important character.
Oh God. Yes, there is. What was her name? Is it
Which
Beverly?
one? The IRS lady?
No,
Deirdre.
Deirdre. I don't know. I was like, it's an old lady name.
Her name is weird. I don't if I remember right when I saw it written down, her name is genuinely is Deirdre. Not Deirdre. I don't think there was an R in it. I think it was just like Deidre.
Yeah, no, that's not that weird.
I I guess my brain
Uh,
flares off. In my brain, Deirdre is the name, so when I say Deirdre, it sounds to me like I'm just saying it with an accent that would make the R a lot softer.
Maybe. But yes, Deirdre is the IRS agent, I guess. She's not really.
Yeah. And like many, well, honestly, like almost every character in the movie, other than one or two background characters, you end up seeing a lot more of her than you expect, and she ends up mattering a lot more than you expect. Because again, this movie is about everything, everywhere, all at once.
And it does live up to that. And then there's also, like, Becky, I think her name is, who is Joy's girlfriend. She's not particularly prominent in the story, but she's around fairly often. And those are your sort of core, like core primary and secondary characters there.
Yeah, Becky's nice.
Yeah. So that's the starting point, and then we jump from the laundromat, which is just chaos, where you have Evelyn trying to juggle a million things, getting frustrated with Waymond, who's just making people happy, as opposed to being super productive, and her dad's coming, which is just adding to the stress. And they have to go to the IRS, where the stress piles on even more because they've not been doing a good job of dealing with their taxation stuff, and she keeps trying extra endeavors and failing, and then mislabeling them as business instead of hobby, and it's not been great.
Yeah.
So
It's where we're introduced to one of the things early on that Evelyn is what I would call an extreme pathological dabbler. She tries to do everything and ends up committing to nothing,
that she does,
which
that which is
don't worry,
actually an
folks, we'll
important
come
plot
back to
point.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so whilst all this is happening, and Deirdre is tearing strips off her for the terrible bookkeeping, suddenly Waymond is inhabited basically by Waymond from a different branching timeline.
A
Who,
very serious, apparently
yeah,
badass women we saw a tiny hint of earlier when we
yeah,
had
in
an
the
otherwise innocuous scene where he's just in the background on the cameras flipping around and doing crazy stuff.
yeah, you just see that in the background, which is just some of the funniest foreshadowing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he explains that there is this dangerous, basically omniscient. That don't know why that was so hard to get out. Multiversal threat called Jobu Tupaki, who is everywhere and everything all at once. Haha. Basically, can experience all these different timelines simultaneously and interact with all of them, and is just sort of wiping them all out in search of Evelyn. And it's not a mystery what this entity is. It almost immediately after that reveals that it is in fact Joy from another timeline.
Yeah, for whatever reason and in whatever way, Joy has somehow gained the ability to freely inhabit any parallel version of herself in any of the multiverses at once with complete and total awareness of what's going on and complete and control over herself and the reality immediately around her.
They do explain that.
And
Uh,
and in the process, she seems to have snapped
yeah, just a little.
Jobu Topaki. Very scary.
But no, they explained what happened. It's in that timeline, that universe. Evelyn actually invented the technology that lets them do the what do they call it? It was something jumping,
First jump.
burst jumping. Right. She invented that technology in that universe, and
But unfortunately, she carried on the same tradition she is in the original reality of pushing her daughter too hard.
yeah. So Joy, who was very good at burst jumping, was pressured more and more by her mother, kept doing it more and more until she somehow just became so aware and capable that she was able to inhabit all of herself, as
Yeah,
was described.
she had the inevitable breakdown that comes from having too much perception. Literally, she's one of the only characters you'll ever see in anything who is literally omnipresent, and her poor teenage brain could not handle being exposed to and uh stop me if you've heard this one before, everything everywhere all at once.
Yeah, I don't know if she's a teenager. She could be early 20s. It's not really
Oh wait, no, they
clear.
said dropped out of college. Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. She is older. She's just short. God. So much of the way they talk to her and so much of her problems like strike me as teenager problems that I keep
I
unconsciously
mean,
thinking of her
she
as
could have
younger.
dropped out at like 19, but
Fair.
yeah. So Joy, the Jobu Tupaki version mostly, but just Joy in general, is our pessimistic nihilism. Effectively, she experiences everything, and it
Yeah.
breaks her, and she realizes that, or has this realization, might be a better way to say it, that none of her choices really matter because it's just all branching off different timelines. It's all irrelevant. It's all meaningless. And the fact that she
It's
can
almost impossible for her to find any meaning in anything, knowing that everything really is just a completely random series of events, and even just doing something like mildly trying to predict or plan for your future seems completely pointless because anything you do could be anything. And nothing you do matters because if you do something stupid and die, there's just another version of you somewhere that didn't.
exactly that's the major crux of it is that nothing matter. None of her decisions or whatever matter because whichever decision she takes in one reality spawns off another reality where she took the opposite one.
And she doesn't even have the luxury everybody else does of either hindsight or foresight or actually getting to make any of those decisions because she
It,
didn't just get exposed to everything everywhere all at once. She is in a constant present quantum superposition of continuing to experience everything all at once. She is simultaneously every single parallel version of herself in the entire multiverse, which means she can feel nothing from any of those decisions because she is making all of them.
at once, yeah. Which is holy shit. That's a lot for a person to deal with. It's kind of understandable how she goes nuts.
Yeah, it's frankly really impressive she didn't go way more nuts.
I mean, she did put literally everything on a bagel.
I mean, it's the everything bagel.
I hate that so much. Uh,
It is the everything bagel.
it's a multiversal threat that really is just the hopes that it can end her existence and put her out of her misery is what this thing is.
Hey man, everything's a multiversal threat.
But yeah, so that's Joy, and Alpha Wayman, as he describes, as we come to know him through regular Wayman, explains all of this to Evelyn, who is rightfully confused by everything going on, is very abruptly set upon by, I guess, almost like sleeper agents that have been that I sort of Jobu has sicked on her, kind of.
Yeah, I think essentially the idea is Jovu can't quite get anyone else to just be like her, but she can she can share just enough of her experience with people to find people who feel the same kind sense of meaninglessness and nothingness that she does and see the higher state of it that she's gotten to and almost kind of worship her. It's not quite that kind of reverence, but they are all completely loyal to her and will do whatever she says because they see her. I mean, they may not worship her that much like a god, but they definitely see her as a god because
I mean, she
to
kind. It
to
feels
what
more
they
like.
are, she is literally the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end.
I mean, yeah, it's more like brainwashing, like, and I mean that in the literal sense. In that they experience her and then are just so, I guess, overpowered by that they just don't have. They just do what she wants. It could also just
Yeah,
be. It could
which
also
means
be a.
she
To be fair though, it
sorry.
could also just be a subset of her whole reality warping thing that she can just tweak things to make them obedient. It's really
It,
hard to
it
say.
could be, but because of that moment we get like for instance with that moment we get with when Deirdre is is like trying to fight losing the possession of her multiversal self, like going off about how she feels nothing and is nothing. I see it more as them as people who have like committed themselves to Jobu's philosophy
Yeah,
more than anything else.
it's not super clear, but I mean, it doesn't need to be necessarily either.
Yeah, but the reason we talk about them coming out of nowhere is, of course, because they can verse jump too, and they can do it better than the good guys who verse jump because for them, only a little bit of it is done through technology. Because Jobu has such a strong pull on into everything and can freely verse jump just at any time without any aid from technology. Anywhere she goes, they can be too, and even places she's not yet, they can be. And since they can verse jump, you never know where they're going to show up. Because what the scary thing is, they're worse than sleeper agents. They're people who are always awake and always around, except because they could literally be anybody, and even if they're currently not themselves, they can become themselves when it's convenient.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's the situation Evelyn is, which is compounded by the fact that because of her pathological dabbling, as you called it, she has branched off many, many, many different timelines, which effectively means there is an ridiculous number of alternate versions of her that she can tap into. Uh,
Every single time Evelyn dabbled in something and ultimately made the decision not to stick to it, there is a version of her that committed all the way and made it her whole life. There's a version of her that committed part of the way and then stopped later on. There's probably many different versions of her along that path, but she has more major splits than the vast majority of people ever would.
which simultaneously makes her the single being in the multiverse who is best equipped to combat Jobu Tupaki, as, but also Jobu's target because she is the one other being basically who is closest to what Jobu is and could become what Jobu is, which is what Jobu wants. Because Jobu Joy wants to have the option to talk to someone who is at her level and see if they come to the same or a different conclusion. And
Yeah, and there's even a small part of her that just she wants to be wrong and she wants to be proven wrong.
she does. She
Like,
outrightly like
despite how hard she's been overhit by the nihilism and the idea that nothing matters, she doesn't want that to be true. In fact, her not wanting that to be true is a big part of why it breaks her.
exactly. Like that's her whole motivation is that she like the entire motivation for jumping world to world to world looking for this version of Evelyn is that she wants to be proven wrong desperately. She wants to feel like things matter, but she doesn't. Which is that's where the exploration of depression comes in and of existentialism and all that, because that's the state that Jobu Joy specifically is in. This just overwhelming feeling of despair and meaninglessness. So that's that's the general gist of the movie. From that point on, the story is primarily about Evelyn first figuring out what she's doing, which she does manage to do quite quickly, and then
Yep,
sort of
that's where the martial arts comes in.
yep,
This movie's got a lot of crazy fighting.
yes, the it does help that Michelle Yeoh is just a fantastic martial artist, but yeah, now she can become very proficient by tapping into a version of herself that stuck with martial arts and never gave it up, basically.
Yep, that's
Um,
one of the main things people do with verse jumping is use it to acquire. Basically, verse jumping allows you to tap, not quite be fully become, but tap into a parallel a version of yourself in a parallel universe,
and their
and
experiences and skills, yeah.
they have learned the mathematic algorithm to figure out how to specifically jump to versions of yourself with sets of skills and completely different life paths from you. And one of the really interesting things they do with that is the fact that to get yourself there's a lot of quantum mechanics in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Like a lot of the multiverse stuff runs on various quantum theories and quantum mechanics, and one of the ideas is that to make yourself in a quantum position of being closer to a parallel version of yourself to tap into it, you usually have to make really, really weird decisions that there is no reason you would make at that moment that could make you closer to branching off in the direction of one of those universes, because those are the kinds of decisions, small, innocuous, but sometimes nonsensical decisions that lead to a lot of those weird branches, because sometimes a weird nothing little moment is more than just a weird nothing little moment and changes the entire path of your life.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. That is exactly it. And that's what Evelyn's doing, and what she's tapping into. She's basically trying to survive and combat Jobu, and most of the rest of the movie is them struggling against each other, and it gets interesting because Jobu mostly starts winning. I mean, obviously, the villain always starts winning at some point in the story, but Jobu experiences a pretty complete victory, and that's not what she actually wanted. She
No,
she showed like Evelyn branches out enough that she achieves a similar level of omnipotence and omniscience, and has the same and sees all these versions of herself that have it so much better as well, which doesn't help. Better in the
It
sense
also
of
doesn't help when we
success.
have Alpha Wayman sitting
Yeah.
her down and just being like, yeah, what makes you special is you're kind of the worst version of yourself.
Yeah.
You've never committed to anything and done anything
Of
of
any
real
consequence.
significant meaning with your life. In the universe I came from, you invented all this technology. You were amazing. And she's just literally having all of her worst fears and self-doubts uh justified and
Yeah.
uh codified right there face to face by not technically the exact same person, but I mean her husband. And she's like, "Oh, cool. Uh,
Yeah, she was already
yeah,
vulnerable and in a vulnerable state of mind, then had that dropped on her, then experiences the omniscience and the
that
omnipotence,
leads to her seeing it's true."
sees it's true, and comes to the same conclusion as Jobu Joy did, basically, that she's irrelevant and that nothing matters. And
Yeah. And for a while she's ready to give in. We get to see a really sad, heavy moment because she hasn't quite reached the same level of omnipresence as Joy yet, in that like she's not she's not quite constantly being every version of herself, but she's reached a point where every different alternate version of herself is connected and
yeah,
sharing certain experiences now. And we get to watch as everything, everywhere, all at once starts to come crashing down with every different parallel version of Evelyn simultaneously coming to the conclusion, even the ones that aren't aware of exactly why, that nothing matters, and throwing away the different things they gave up on. We have the famous Kung Fu Master movie star version of her who was about to patch things up with Wayman, because this is a reality where she left him and they never got together, only to decide that nothing matters and immediately start trying to like make out with him and be sexy, which, because he was trying to have a serious conversation about how he's always loved her, breaks his heart as he realizes that for the second time in his life he's been forced to come to the conclusion that he doesn't really mean all that much to her.
yeah.
And like we're seeing multiple different versions of them all at once. That's one of the sadder ones. We see versions of her that aren't with him and don't care. We see versions of her that have accepted and heavily embraced the divorce papers, which, despite him being the one who wrote them up,
He
hurts
didn't
him
want it.
really
He
bad.
just wanted to put Evelyn in a position where she had to talk their shit out.
And we see a version of her that's almost the exact same version we're following as the main character of the movie, except it's just her if the movie had kept going without her being exposed to any of the multiverse stuff. She's just at the laundromat trying to have her Chinese New Year
Yeah.
party.
Which I think is
And
actually what that world is.
yeah, no, that's literally what
Yeah.
that world is. That world is the movie if she hadn't been exposed to any of the multiverse stuff. Um,
Which is very cool.
and that version of her just has a
Yeah.
breakdown
I think it's
in
important,
the
right?
middle of the party.
It's important we see that because we see that even without all the crazy multiversal shit, she was still screwed.
Yeah,
Her
but
life was still
one
going
of
to
the
fall apart that day.
there's only one thing that really helps her start to pull herself out of the slump, and that's the same thing that's always been there to pull her out of the muck and always been trying to uplift her and make her happy. And that's Wayman.
Yeah.
In
She's
every different universe where she's with him, he he is not a universal constant in that he's always there, because there are obviously versions of her that aren't with him or aren't even around him. But he's a universal constant in that every single alternate version of him she sees is at his core an extremely kind, caring, and strong-willed individual.
Yeah, Evelyn
And
is.
he's always doing his best no matter what happens, no matter what universe he's in. He's always doing his best, whereas every different version of her is just moving through life and living and going with the flow to a point for better or worse. And she finally recognizes that strength he's always had that she never saw in him, because as much as she loved him, she's always considered him a weak person.
Evelyn was fully prepared to step into the bagel with Jobu and die. Basically, she was so deep into that she was ready to off herself. Because, again, this is also a movie about depression, because of course it is. It's a movie about everything.
Everywhere.
And it's only that realization because she in one universe gets to have that discussion with Wayman where
And
she
it's funny enough, the where she breaks his heart as a superstar.
yeah because he's very honest with her. He says straight up, you think that I'm like this because I'm weak-willed and not focused on progress or success or whatever. But the reason he is the way he is, that he's light-hearted and jovial and treats everyone with kindness and doesn't sweat the small stuff and all these things, is strategic. He is
How
making
he
the yeah,
survives.
that's how he survives. He's making the choice to live his life without worry, and that's how he gets through it. And he helps, and that's how he helps other people get through it, and that's how he helps Evelyn get through it, and what clicks with her, and makes her pull away, and then suddenly
And it,
she's in a position where she wants to help her daughter the way that Wayman helped her, and break Joy out of this hole,
yeah.
which is
And
not easy to
one
do because she's part of the problem for Joy.
one of the things I love about that too is it feels like such good catharsis, because we've actually been seeing all throughout the movie how even when it's inexplicable and there doesn't seem to be logic to it, Wayman's dedication to kindness and just making things better always does find a way to make things at least a little bit better, including when, against all odds and everything they've screwed up, his simple act of kindness gets the IRS lady who's ready to throw them to the dogs to give them a second chance multiple different times in more than one universe, even
Yeah,
just through simple acts of kindness. And there's other little things we see in the movie here or there. There's even one or two times where she recognizes it's happening and is confused, but then either gets distracted or the story doesn't have time to address it further because there's too much going on. But we consistently see throughout the movie that like he does make things better. He doesn't just make things lighthearted or not be serious. He genuinely makes the people around him feel better and want to be better. And she finally all at once sees the truth of that.
yeah, she has this realization, and then suddenly finds herself in the position where she wants to do what he has done. But the problem with that is that she is the reason in so many ways that Joy has like fallen into this place, because even if we like every version of Joy is feeling these things. The Jobu Tupaki version is just the one that had
Direct
yeah,
exposure.
was exposed to the entire weight of the multiverse on top of it and became an omnicidal being. But every version of Joy is dealing with Evelyn shit, basically, that Evelyn hasn't been proud of her or supportive of her because Evelyn hasn't felt those things about herself because
And because she really never wanted her daughter to be like her. And unfortunately, in the best ways and one or two of the less good ways, she is.
yeah, exactly it. She didn't want Joy to turn out like her, but Joy did. So she's kind of twice over a disappointment. She's a disappointment because she hasn't had a better life than Evelyn ended up with. But also, she is a source of shame and another way that Evelyn herself has failed and therefore looks bad to her father because she's still failing because Joy isn't living up to those expectations that she had for Joy. Therefore, she is not living up to expectations herself. It's a
Because
very
despite the fact that she chose to go away from her father, leave him and the life that he made for her, and disagree with his ideas about her life, the compunctions he wanted to put on her and everything, at the end of the day, he did genuinely instill those values in her, and she never stopped thinking at least some or believing at least some of what he taught her, and suffering the pain not only of knowing he was disappointed in her, but thinking he was right to be disappointed in her.
yeah. I mean, and but the thing is as well though is that all of that from him isn't coming from a place of malevolence. He
No,
he does all that
he's
and is that way because he wants the best for his daughter because at the core of it he cares about her and wants her to have a good life, which
he's
again
just
is
unfortunately
exactly what
very
she does to
stuck.
Joy.
Yeah, they're both very stuck in having concrete ideas of what makes a better life.
That's where those elements of generational trauma we mentioned come into it because even though it all stems from the best of intentions, it is still an incredibly toxic, unhealthy dynamic, and that is what is tearing Evelyn's family apart. And she has to come to that realization, and that means not just she not only has to take the step forward to be better to Joy, she first has to accept her own failings and love who she is as a person. So she can then, from that point, extend that hand to Joy and say, it's okay, you can be whoever you are and whatever you want, it's fine. You will find your meaning doesn't have to come from this idea. You can decide what is meaningful and important to you and what you want to be. And it takes
Yeah,
a hell of a lot of effort to break that through to Joy.
yeah, no, and it's really intense. We get this first. We get our great and wonderful victorious montage, which I think is just so excellently written. We glossed over a little bit when Evelyn first finally comes to her conclusions and to follow Wayman's kindness and starts to genuinely really feel that because nothing matters, everything matters, and she does a hardcore kill him with kindness rampage,
Through the
and
multiverse.
literally she decides to stop fighting everything everywhere all at once and starts actually just bringing joy and happiness to every single person that stands in her way
Yeah,
and making them see the truth.
she accepts them for their flaws and their faults and extends a hand to kindness, and by doing that to others learns to do that for herself and is then able to do that for Joy,
And yeah, and
which
while
is
she's
fucking
doing,
beautiful.
yeah, what I was getting at is while she goes to that point, we get this wonderful little thing that's partially a fight scene, but what is actually really just an emotional heart to heart mother daughter conversation choreographed as a multiversal fight scene. That's it's really actually instead just a multiversal argument and screaming match.
Yeah,
And you may hear me
there's
say that and go like, "Oh, well, what's so deep about a screaming match?" And the thing is, sometimes screaming matches are the deepest conversations because they can become the realest, rawest conversations where everybody finally says the things they've never been able or willing to say before.
yeah,
And through the truth, we find a way forward.
there's not actually that much action going on. It just feels dynamic because they're having this, you know, they're letting all these pent up feelings and thoughts out finally, but they're doing it whilst jumping from universe to universe. So it's still so it feels as dynamic as a long drawn out fight scene, even though the actual action is pretty minimal.
Yeah, and it's really nice. And I love that we finally not only do we get the moment of her defeat having this conversation with and defeating Jobu Topaki, because that's one of the great things, right? Is we get this conversation twice. We get the more antagonistic one of her directly fighting Jobu Topaki, the Joy Prime, if you will, and starting to get her to see the truth. But then
I
we're
mean,
left alone
it's
for a minute.
I would say it's more the inverse, right? Because that's the one where Jobu Joy breaks her down.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is though we get both, right? We get them struggling and fighting until Evelyn finally reaches a moment of acceptance where she sees not only how committed Joy is to this idea, but also
Oh,
that
I know. I see. I
you,
was thinking of
yes,
earlier in the movie. I see. I see what you're
you
talking
you
about.
can't save somebody who doesn't want to save themselves, and she has to accept that her daughter is going to do what she's going to do, which is actually an important step along the way to saving herself as well, because despite the fact that she had come very close to the truth, she was still at that moment once again trying to force her ideology on Joy, and she realizes finally that that's never going to be the answer no matter what, even if she is right. And she lets go. And we see Joy about to step into the donut, only for Evelyn to have one last realization of being like, wait, you know what? Maybe I. Maybe I can't force you into anything. Maybe I shouldn't be trying to get you to see everything the way I see everything. But God damn it, I'm gonna at least make you understand how I feel. I'm not gonna hold back anymore. And she yanks her back out to basically be like, fine, you do what you want to do, but we're gonna talk first. I got some shit to say to you.
Yeah.
And goes off on her. And the thing I love is that leads to this moment we get where she has her fight and her conditions and everything against Jobu Topaki. But then we get this quiet minute in the universe where none of the multiverse stuff started happening, and Jobu Tapaki is not inhabiting Joy at all. It's just Evelyn talking to the version of Joy she's always had and always struggled to understand and to make understand her. And they have the mundane parallel to the screaming match we already saw between Evelyn and Jobu Tapaki. And they just sit and talk and air out all their grievances and negatives with each other and get this sweet little moment of essentially Joy being like, so what then? What do we do now? Why don't you just leave me alone? If I have all these flaws and there's so much wrong with me, why are you still here? Why don't you just let me go and leave me alone? And Evelyn being like, because I love you. Uh, you you matter. You are a part of me, and you matter so much to me that out of all the infinite numbers of choices, the infinite number of places we could we could both be people, we could be what I could be doing, and how none of it matters. I'm here with you right now, and I always will be.
Yeah, straight up, like, yeah, I could be anywhere doing anything, but I will always choose to be here with you despite these flaws.
And that's where she really makes the same decision Wayman made a long time ago with her.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because I mean, from the beginning, Wayman had to embrace Evelyn's flaws and things, because that's kind of what love is. It's not just the things you admire about a person. It is being aware of and accepting of the things that irk you about a person that you don't like, and deciding that the things you admire about them are more important, are a bigger
Yeah,
part of them.
you don't have to also love someone's flaws, but you also can't fix anybody. And you can't truly love somebody if you don't fully commit yourself to loving them. And you also, you don't have to, well, once again, you don't have to come to accept or to love somebody's flaws just like you love the rest of them. But you do have to be able to accept and embrace them, because a person is a whole, and even when they're not actively happening and actively bugging you, those flaws are always there. To embrace somebody, you have to embrace the whole,
And
and
you,
their flaws are a part of that.
yeah, and you absolutely have to apply that same philosophy to yourself.
Yeah,
In
you
fact,
can't love yourself if you
you
can't
have to,
accept all of yourself.
you have to do that first. And the movie does show that it's not until Evelyn is accepting of her own failings and place in the world that she is able to be accepting of how Joy feels and is in the world. And
And how Rakakuni feels.
we like that's the wild thing about this movie, right? Is that there's all this deep shit going on, incredibly deep, symbolic, metaphorical stuff, and in so many different levels, in different directions. Because again, everything, everywhere, all at once. But at the same time, there's gags about butt plugs and a world where people have sausages for fingers and
The sausages spray condiments.
oh god, it's just so bad. And
Oh, I hate it.
a Ratatouille world where there is a chef guy being controlled by a raccoon in his hat, which is in itself a joke about the fact that Evelyn tries to describe the verse jumping by comparing it to being controlled by Ratatouille in the movie Ratatouille, but she can't
And she
get the
just can't
name
seem
right,
to get it straight.
so
She
she
keeps
keeps saying
calling it
Rakakuni.
Rakakuni, and everybody's just thinking like, "Oh, this is one of her things again. She's not trying hard enough to have a total grasp of English. She always messes up words like this and then just says the words are overly complicated and blames the
Which is
words."
true.
Which is true, but then you get to this moment and you're like, "Oh,
But
was that
then
a little bit of early multiversal bleeding? Has she been getting stuck on this Rakakuni idea because there's a version of her where it's real?"
yeah, it's that's the insane thing about this movie is that it's doing this batshit goofy absurdist comedy stuff simultaneously as these crazy deep metaphorical existential questions, and also with a very grounded story of family drama and generational trauma.
Yeah, it's so true to life in that it's
Complicated and
so
messy.
it's so brutal. There's so many different things going on at once, and they simultaneously achieve discord and harmony and fluctuate between the two at any moment. And it's a big, beautiful, ugly, violent, peaceful, happy, sad mess. It's I,
Everything, everywhere, all at once.
I've never seen a movie encompass its title so truly and in so many different ways, and
I've
especially not with such an otherwise strange and vague title.
yeah, it's. I'm gonna read through the list again, just like everything you've just said, and I now want to like just stack on the list I read at the beginning of this episode. Comedy, drama, sci-fi movie, martial arts action movie, a romance, tale of familial love, an exploration of loneliness and depression and generational trauma, a story of self-discovery, and simultaneously a metaphor for and examination of existentialism and the different branches of nihilistic philosophy.
Yeah.
And also, on top of all that, it's a movie about acceptance of all of that crazy shit that John listed and all the crazy shit that I listed as its genre bending insanity. At the very core of it, it's a movie about saying, okay, this is who I am, this is how the world is. I can only change myself. I can only control myself, and that's okay. Which is it's such a simple yet deep thing that is so hard for a lot of people to grasp. It's something I struggle with all the time.
Yeah. It's it's a really good reminder that the best thing you can do is really just try to make things better. And if you're always doing your best and trying to make things better for yourself and sometimes to an extent as well that the people around you, sometimes you're going to succeed and slowly things will get better.
Exactly. It is a stupid stupid movie and it's so beautiful.
And it's so smart.
And it's so smart. It's
Uh,
and the thing is like we've done, right? We've pretty much hit our hour just about, if not over by a little bit. And all we've done really is describe the movie and say
yeah, I
why we
mean,
like it. We've barely touched upon like the actual relevance of how it blends genres and things like that because it's fucking impossible.
it, oh man, it's,
Every single little thing is so integral to the movie and so thoroughly mashed together that it is impossible to separate it out enough to analyze it as anything but the whole in some ways.
this is the most skimming you will probably ever hear in any episode of this podcast simply because there is genuinely too much to be said about this movie
Yeah,
if we were trying to
like
do a full deep dive. I mean, there's other stuff we've covered where in the process of the hour I was like, "Damn, we pretty much covered everything that really matters about that in the broad strokes," and then kept going and we're able to keep talking. And this is like we've made it through a drop in the bucket in an hour.
yeah, it's insane, and that's like we could sit here and go through the process of untangling every individual theme we've listed, every genre we've listed, every subplot or storyline, because it doesn't feel like it, but there is like several little subplots all happening across different multiverses. We could see her and unpack all of that, but it would take like 6 hours.
Yeah, because this is a movie where every single bit of it has been thought out, and even the parts that are completely uncalculated and just exist because they're funny or a single little moment still exist for a reason. And in some cases, they are the reason for their own existence, which is another really deep, thoughtful thing about this movie that applies to everything in this movie. because everything in this movie matters. But I'm not gonna say it again. I've said it enough times, but fuck.
It's true though. Like even the stupid sausage fingers world is incredibly important because a it's a world where Evelyn actually has a relationship with Deirdre or Deirdre. I'm never
Yeah,
totally sure how to pronounce that. And they have to, and we
lesbivalin.
yeah, and we have to and we have to watch them work through their relationship issues in the same way every other version we see is her working through her shit with Wayman. But it's also a
Yeah,
message about adapting to your circumstances and making do with what you have. Because when your fingers are sausages, as it turns out, you can't easily do a lot of things that other people in other universes can do with their hands, so they all had to get really good with their feet and do things like play a learn on the piano with their toes.
yeah.
So
It's
even
it's
that insane, stupid, ridiculous segment of the movie is incredibly deep and meaningful and important, with an important message that applies to everything else in the movie.
yeah. It's great because it even literally it not only is it a big part of Evelyn's realization, but how she vocalizes it because it literally gives us Evelyn saying, "It's okay. Everything's gonna be okay. Even in a universe where we've all got hot dogs for hands, we just get good at using our feet."
Which is, that sentence should not make me feel things.
That sentence shouldn't mean anything,
And yet,
but it means so much.
okay, I'm gonna bring us back round for one final hurrah to actually
Yeah.
address the theme of the cycle. You could argue we've been doing that this whole time, and you would be right, but also wrong. Welcome to this movie.
You know.
Way back, way back, it wasn't that long ago. In the very first episode in this cycle, we addressed the reasons why you would want to tell a story where you are blending genres. And we had, there was the issue of mass appeal, which this movie is simultaneously the most niche thing on the planet and also has something for everyone, so that's in there. And there was stuff about, target audiences, executive meddling, whatever. But the thing that I really want to touch on was that we mentioned by mixing and matching and mashing together and pulling apart or whatever different genres, you can create a story that is a very unique experience. And holy crap, does this movie exemplify that? There is not another story like this one. There's
No.
plenty of other movies that out there that deal with, familial drama, generational drama, homophobia and existentialism and sci-fi technology and philosophy. There's plenty of movies out there that do all of those things. There's some of them that do more than one of those things in that story. There's possibly even some that combine every element I just said, as this movie does. But I am fully confident in saying that this is possibly one of the most original and unique stories I've come across. Purely, even if there are other stories out there that deal with similar technologies and plot lines and themes, purely by the way it is so seamlessly integrated and the way it is executed, and how much is seamlessly integrated into a story like that. There's no other story out there quite like this one, and that is purely just from a writing perspective. If this was a different podcast, we could spend an additional several hours on top of that theoretical 6 just talking about the untangling the story itself, talking about how incredible the soundtrack is or the cinematography is. But we don't do that here. Aren't you lucky? It's we said John said it earlier on in the episode. It is so hard to discuss this movie with or to understand exactly how incredible it is without seeing the movie.
Yeah. And in fact, I'm almost thinking now that like it this is a very hard movie to talk about without spoiling some things. But at the same time, because there is so much to it that we could never cover in a short amount of time, I would also say, in a way, it's hard to truly spoil it, which is so I'm gonna say again before we get to the rest of our closing stuff. Even for anybody who didn't listen to my earlier warning and didn't go and watch the movie before listening to this episode, please go watch the movie. I promise there's still so much left
Yeah, it's
that we haven't covered.
it's an incredible movie. It'll make you feel things. It will make you laugh. The writing is excellent, and
Everything is excellent, man. The
yeah,
writing, the music, the sound design, the cinematography, the acting. Oh,
yeah. Oh, the writing and also all that stuff we aren't allowed to talk about.
yes.
Yeah. Oh God, I've just fried my brain. I was gonna say something. Um.
It's a brain fry movie.
Oh yeah, right. It is incredibly good. Like it's is it my favorite movie ever? No, and it won't necessarily be your favorite movie ever either. But it is incredible, and I think it is a story that as many people as possible should experience, purely because it is such a unique existence in the world of storytelling, and because it is executed pretty much as close to perfection as any movie or story in general could be, just at a technical level.
Yeah, it's a hard feeling to truly put into words without just sounding like it's supposed to be a really strong recommendation that says the movie's good or whatever. But like honestly, regardless of what you think of the quality or even almost of how much you like it, this is this is one of hell it I can't remember off the top of my head, so it may be the only movie I've ever seen where I watch it and I'm left with this with a feeling of everybody should see this.
Yeah, it's even if you end
Not
up
just a movie that anybody could watch, but anyone should watch.
yeah, because the messages and themes and philosophy behind it is all beautiful, but also just surface level. It's quite fun.
Yeah,
Again, it really is everything. And even if
everywhere.
even if for some reason your taste is bad enough that you come out of it and hated the movie, I would be amazed if you couldn't find something that you still admired about it, because that is the level of proficiency that was on display.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
oh,
it's one
it's
of
the everything
those.
bagel.
Yeah, it's the everything bagel. It's the story a writer experiences and goes, I want to make people feel like that.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the kind of movie that would inspire so many people not only to potentially make changes in themselves, but like this is the kind of movie that becomes a pivotal moment in the real stories of real people, whether it's a prospective writer who goes, "Oh, I want to make people feel this way," and like any different kind of writer. It could inspire someone who's writing a book. It could obviously inspire somebody who's making their own movie. I'm sure it's going to inspire plenty of people making video games, since video games, I think, more often come closer to these kinds of topics and these kinds of thoughts than movies do a lot of the time, if only because in a video game, the audience is
We
an active participant.
yeah I we talked about this. I talked about this a lot uh, in the horror cycle, that games add, because they add agency, add a whole other dimension of storytelling you can explore. But
Yeah, and
yeah,
it's oh
honestly, I'm we're gonna call it there purely because we have just spent probably. I mean, if we're being honest, we've spent this entire episode just raving about how good this story is, how good this movie is, and rightly so.
it's so good that anything you say about it is going to be talking about how good it is because everything you bring up is going to be good.
True enough. But on that note, we shall call it there before we do end up spending that full 6 hours just going through and breaking down every little insane element. So, for those of you who are listening to this over on Google Podcast or Spotify or something, you can also find all of these episodes on my website, radfordwrites.com. You can also find sort of samples, the transcripts of the stories that I write for episodes there and some other stuff that I occasionally will put out. You can find a link to my YouTube channel there and also a link to my Twitter, which is DanielWright7, where I also occasionally spout inane ramblings. As always, you will see plenty more of John in future episodes of the podcast, as well as hear his voice reading my stories in pretty much any medium I can get my hands on.
Yeah.
Until then, we shall see you next time.